The day they opened the will, everyone expected money. Some expected land, others expected jewelry, savings, maybe hidden investments no one knew about. The room smelled of expensive perfume and fake grief, and every relative sat there pretending they had loved old Walter Bennett while secretly calculating what they would receive. But when the lawyer adjusted his glasses and read the final line, silence swallowed the room. To my grandson, Ethan Bennett, I leave the cabin beside Blackwood Lake, and everything inside it. For 2 seconds, nobody moved. Then laughter exploded across the room. Not small chuckles, real laughter, cruel laughter. Even Ethan's own uncle slapped the table and wiped tears from his eyes. That rotten shack, he laughed. The old man gave you a pile of termites. Another cousin smirked. Congratulations, Ethan. You inherited mold. Even Ethan forced a weak smile, though deep down the humiliation burned like acid in his chest. Because they were right. The cabin was worthless, or at least, that's what everyone believed. But what nobody knew was this. 3 months later, every single person in that room would wish they had been the one to inherit it. And by then, it would already be too late. Before we continue, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that sometimes life hides its greatest blessings inside the things the world laughs at first. And trust me, this story's ending will stay with you long after the video is over. Ethan Bennett had spent most of his life feeling invisible. At 32 years old, he was the kind of man people overlooked in conversations. Quiet, simple, honest. He worked as a mechanic in a small garage outside town, lived in a tiny apartment with peeling paint, and drove a truck older than most teenagers. His cousins had corporate jobs, luxury homes, vacation photos, perfect smiles. Meanwhile, Ethan spent weekends fixing broken engines and eating instant noodles. Still, there had always been one person who truly saw him. His grandfather Walter. Walter Bennett was different from the rest of the family. He hated flashy people, hated arrogance, hated greed. He had worked with his hands his whole life and believed character mattered more than status. When Ethan was little, Walter used to take him fishing beside Blackwood Lake. The cabin stood there among tall pine trees, isolated from the world. Small, weathered, ancient, but Ethan loved it. Inside the cabin, there was no yelling, no judgment, no competition, just peace. His grandfather taught him how to chop wood, repair broken chairs, cook over a fire, and listen to silence without being afraid of it. You can tell who a man really is, Walter once told him, when there's nothing around to impress anyone. Ethan never forgot those words. As Walter grew older, the family visited less and less. His children only came when they needed money. His grandchildren barely called, but Ethan kept showing up. Every Sunday, every birthday, every winter storm, he repaired Walter's roof when it leaked, brought groceries, stacked firewood, sat beside him during hospital visits, and never asked for anything in return. Still, Ethan never expected inheritance. Especially not the cabin. When he finally drove out there after the funeral, rain hammered the windshield the entire way. The place looked worse than he remembered. The porch sagged. The windows were dusty. Paint peeled from the walls like dead skin. The lake beside it reflected gray clouds and loneliness. Ethan stood there quietly with the keys in his hand. Part of him wanted to turn around and leave forever. The family's laughter still echoed in his mind. But another part of him remembered his grandfather's voice. So he unlocked the door. The cabin smelled like cedar wood, old books, and time itself. Everything remained exactly where Walter left it. His fishing hat still hung beside the door. The old kettle sat on the stove. A faded blanket rested across the armchair. For a moment, Ethan almost expected his grandfather to walk in smiling. Instead, silence answered him. Then he noticed something strange. On the table sat a small envelope. His name was written across it. Ethan. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it also means the rest of the family laughed exactly the way I knew they would. Ethan swallowed hard. You may think I left you very little. But this cabin saved my life once. And one day, it may save yours too. There's something important hidden here. But before you search for it, I need you to understand something first. The next lines made Ethan's eyes fill with tears. Never measure value the way the world does. He sat there for nearly an hour reading the letter over and over. Walter described moments Ethan barely remembered. Fishing together, fixing the dock, building birdhouses. Then near the end came one final sentence. When the storms come, look beneath the place where warmth remains. That was it. No explanation, no map, no clues. Just that sentence. Ethan searched the cabin that entire weekend. Nothing. No money. No safe. No hidden compartments. Eventually he convinced himself the letter was symbolic. Maybe Walter only meant emotional warmth. Memories. Love. And honestly, Ethan needed that more than treasure anyway. So instead of selling the cabin, he decided to restore it. Little by little, after work, he drove there daily. He repaired broken windows, strengthened the porch, cleaned years of dust from the floors. It wasn't easy. Money was tight. People mocked him constantly. One cousin posted online, "Imagine inheriting garbage and acting proud of it." The comments were brutal, but Ethan ignored them, because for the first time in years, he felt peaceful. Months passed. Then one night, everything changed. A violent storm hit Blackwood Lake harder than any weather forecast predicted. Rain slammed against the cabin. Wind screamed through the trees. Around midnight, the electricity died. Ethan lit the fireplace and wrapped himself in Walter's old blanket. The storm outside grew terrifying. Thunder shook the walls, and suddenly, crack, part of the floor near the fireplace collapsed beneath him. Ethan jumped back in shock. Dust exploded into the air. The wooden boards had rotted underneath from years of hidden moisture. Heart pounding, Ethan grabbed a flashlight and looked into the hole. There was something down there. A metal box, rust-covered, locked. His hands shook as he pulled it out. The lock had nearly corroded away, so he smashed it open with a hammer. Inside were old documents, photographs, letters, and beneath them, stacks of cash, bundles and bundles of cash. Ethan froze. His mind struggled to understand what he was seeing. But that wasn't even the biggest surprise. At the bottom of the box lay property records. Dozens of them. Land deeds. Walter had secretly purchased massive areas of land around Blackwood Lake decades earlier when nobody wanted them. And now, the area had become incredibly valuable due to upcoming resort development plans. Ethan stared at the papers in disbelief. The land was worth millions. Millions. The worthless cabin sat in the center of all of it. He sat on the floor laughing and crying at the same time. Not because of the money, but because suddenly he understood. Walter had known exactly what the family would do. He knew greed would blind them. They only valued what looked expensive immediately. None of them had loved the cabin enough to care for it. Only Ethan did. Only Ethan stayed. Only Ethan listened. The next weeks turned Ethan's life upside down. Lawyers contacted him. Developers made offers. Local newspapers wrote articles about the hidden lake fortune. And suddenly, the same relatives who mocked him began calling nonstop. His uncle invited him to dinner. Cousins apologized. People who ignored him for years suddenly acted warm and loving. But Ethan saw through every smile now. One afternoon, his cousin Rebecca arrived at the cabin wearing sunglasses and fake concern. "You know," she said carefully, "Grandpa would have wanted the family to share everything." Ethan looked at her quietly. "Really?" he asked softly. "Where were you when he was sick?" She had no answer. Another uncle even threatened legal action, claiming Walter wasn't mentally stable when writing the will. But the case failed instantly. Walter had prepared everything perfectly. Every document, every signature, every transfer. It was airtight, because Walter knew exactly who his family was. And who Ethan was too. But despite suddenly becoming wealthy, Ethan didn't change the way people expected. He didn't buy a mansion. Didn't buy luxury cars. Didn't move to some rich neighborhood. Instead, he restored the cabin completely. Not into a modern palace, but into something warm, alive. He repaired the dock Walter loved. Rebuilt the fireplace. Preserved every memory. Then he did something nobody expected. He opened part of the land to struggling families as a retreat center. Single mothers, veterans, people battling grief, children with nowhere peaceful to go. He built small cabins around the lake and allowed people to stay there for free when life became too heavy. And slowly, Blackwood Lake became known not for wealth, but for healing. One evening years later, Ethan sat beside the water watching the sunset bleed gold across the lake. An older man approached him quietly. It was Thomas, Walter's former best friend. "I knew your grandfather hid something," Thomas admitted with a smile. Ethan laughed softly. "You did." Thomas nodded. "But the money wasn't the real inheritance." Ethan looked at him curiously. Thomas pointed toward the families laughing near the cabins. Children running through the grass. People smiling around campfires. "He left you purpose." That sentence hit Ethan harder than the fortune ever did. Because deep down, he knew it was true. Money changed his circumstances, but the cabin changed his soul. Years earlier, Ethan had felt like the least important person in the family. The failure. The forgotten one. But Walter saw something everyone else missed. Kindness, loyalty, patience, and sometimes the people the world laughs at first become the very people everyone later admires. Not because they got rich, but because they stayed good after they did. On the anniversary of Walter's death, Ethan found one final letter hidden behind the fireplace stones during renovations. Short, simple, only 3 lines. "If they laugh at you for choosing love over status, let them laugh. Time reveals everything eventually." Ethan stared at the words with tears in his eyes. Because time really had revealed everything. The greedy relatives eventually drifted apart, still fighting over money and bitterness. But Ethan built something real. A life filled with meaning. And every year, hundreds of people visited Blackwood Lake carrying broken hearts. And left feeling whole again. All because one old man understood a truth most people never learn. The greatest treasures rarely look valuable at first. So if you've ever felt underestimated, ignored, or laughed at for dreaming differently, remember Ethan Bennett. Sometimes the cabin everyone mocks today becomes the blessing everyone wishes they had tomorrow. And sometimes the people who inherit the least end up gaining the most. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that true worth isn't always visible in the beginning. Because life has a strange way of rewarding the people who stay humble when everyone else is chasing appearances.